We go?
Yeah.
Okay. Johannes is very organised, I'm less so. And I don't have a script prepared, so I may jump around a bit, but that's the way it works anyway. So, I'll tell you a little bit about myself, and Jude will tell you a bit about her practice and herself, and then how we collaborate together. I'm an immersive documentary photographer, fully immersive, and I explain what that is. I make friends. Sorry? Oh, sorry. I make friends, and I immerse myself in their life, and then I document their life, and so I make documentary photographs and essays about the friends that I make and keep. So I did an MA. I was 46 before I bought my first camera. I designed and built gardens all my life, and at 46 I bought my first camera, and then I enrolled on little courses, then on to an MA, and then the MA's opened a lot of doors, and I've completely changed my career, I'm still working. I'm still a recent graduate, so it's only been when did I graduate? 3 years ago. So I graduated in lockdown, and it's been quite a rapid journey and quite an exciting journey. Do you want to talk about yourself?
Yeah.
Go on then.
I've worked in photography a lot longer than Nick. I sort of started when I was 16, which isn't that long ago, but I also went back and did my MA at the same time as Nick, and that's how I met Nick. But I worked in photography all the way through that, through loads of different career paths. But I wanted to develop my own practice a bit more. I've worked in education, I've worked in industry all the way through, and then went back and did my master's to kind of provide myself with a bit more time and framework for my own work, my own practice. And yeah, and then kind of...
I'd be absolutely stuffed without Jude, to be honest. So if we look at should we look at a few pictures? So I was really fortunate. On my MA, a publisher picked up my project and published my first book. And so my work is in chapters, or I look at it in chapters. And so I started in a wider community. All my work is about people who are in and out of prison, and locked in this cycle. Well, if I start with my brother, went to maximum security prison when I was a teenager, and so I've always been interested in people that have shared a similar life, and so I went looking for people that have shared a similar experience to me, because I thought, well, who the hell am I to talk about these things if I don't have the same experience myself? So this started with a broader community of people. I'll talk about this in a second, but that's chapter 2, is after we brought the stolen bike stolen. And there's a third chapter. So if we look at some images from, I don't even know if they're over there. Sorry? Is it? Oh. So we jump in right to the present day. So I met a guy called Tony in the street. Tony's this guy here with a beard. I gravitate towards people that most people would run a mile from. I met Tony in the street. He was shouting and swearing and everybody was crossing the road, and I went to him, and 2 years later we were the best of friends, and I was living in his house. And Tony lived in a cave in Nepal for 3 years, and when I met him he lived in a townhouse in Swansea, an old mining village on the outside of Swansea, a place called Clydach. But he preferred to live in an Arctic bell tent in the woods behind. And he only used his house for water and electricity. And because he'd had quite an interest in life, Jude and I used to go down to his house, or I would sleep in his house, but Jude would come early in the morning, and we'd put lining paper on the wall of his living room, and we'd put a Sharpie in his hand, and he would plot his life. So this is his lifeline in his own handwriting, right through from in his early years in Ireland, through living in his cave in Nepal. Maggie Thatcher, the bus snatcher, she stole his bus off him. Apparently he was living in a bus in Ireland and she stole it, apparently so. And then is there another slide, please? And so these are some images that I made with Tony, living in his house. And this is the early part of him living in his tent. And the whole plan, I had Arts Council funding. Sorry, I'm jumping around, as I said I would. But I had Arts Council funding. They paid me several £1,000s to research and develop my project, which I strongly advise anybody to do. If you have a strong project or a strong narrative or a strong idea, then submit a proposal. It's not always successful. I was successful with this, and I've not been successful since. You can't guarantee that you'll get further investment. Sorry? Carry on. I'll just go on. Jude's also my partner, so.
The Arts Council funding was really difficult to apply for in the first place, and I think that Nik struggled and still struggles with being given money to make his work.
Yeah.
And I think that is something that artists do struggle with a lot. They don't want to pay themselves, and that is often why you'll get declined Arts Council funding. So often I write Nik's proposals for him so that I can push that forward. And I think if you can find someone that you're working with that can promote you, that can help you, that can kind of see things from that different side and not, I'm terrible at doing it for myself, but I'll do it for him, and that's a different story. And the most recent one that we didn't do was because we were a bit woolly, and we know that.
We weren't sure in how we proposed, and they saw it, and they declined the application. I struggle with valuing my work because I do it anyway. These are my friends, and it's more about engaging people in a conversation, and the conversation may not be had if I wasn't making this work and trying to take it around in talks like this and engage the wider society in people who are sort of trapped in this cycle. What? Next slide. Maybe we just look at some images and I'll stop talking for a second. Go back to this one, please. This is great. Not the picture, just the story. So Tony, so my friends, they're in and out of prison, and they've all had traumatic lives, and they self-medicate and overuse or misuse drugs. And Tony, he didn't believe he would live beyond 60. Both his parents were 59 when they died, and I met Tony when he was about to turn 59. And so this was his birthday, this was his 60th birthday. And so Jude made him a cake with 60 candles on it. And we couldn't find him, he'd gone missing because he was terrified of passing 60. And we found him in a crack house. He'd been there for 3 days smoking crack. And Jude and I walked in, and there's a guy smoking a crack pipe. And we started singing happy birthday. And they couldn't work out whether we were real or just in their own minds. Is there another image of this in this chapter? This is the last of this chapter. But sadly, Tony died before we got to resolve the work. And the application for the Arts Council funding was to go back and find his cave in Nepal. He had some back payments from some social security, and he could have we were hoping he could have lived happily ever after, taken his windfall of several £1,000s, go and find his cave, and then live there. But sadly he died before we made it. It was about 3 months before we were going, and he didn't make it. He took his own life because he was terrified of passing his 60th birthday. And so we had his birthday, and I think he was dead within 3 weeks. On that note. Jude's work is also jolly.
Yeah, really happy. But my work is very different to Nik's. I'm more of a fine art documentary photographer, I think, but I do try to see the happy joy in
the dark.
really dark situations. So this is from a current project that I'm working on.
If we look at a couple of images.
Yeah, just if you want to go a bit further on.
Maybe when you get to the next image, you can explain what this is. Go.
Okay, so this is a new project that I've been working on, and it came out of something that happened in lockdown, really. I always work on quite, I suppose, personal, but I always want to see the light. I want things to be good, I want things to be happy, and I want things to be fixed. And during lockdown, obviously Sarah Everard was killed, and that made mainstream press, but about 6 months before that, where I lived in Exeter, a woman called Lorraine Cox had been murdered and chopped into pieces and buried all over the city.
Told you it was jolly.
I was really happy. And,
but it didn't make the news.
But it didn't make the news in the same way, and there wasn't that kind of... And what I got interested in was the language that was used in the press, and how that was sort of dealt with, and why it was different, and why should it be different, because everybody was, if two people are killed, it's the same thing, ultimately, you should all be treated the same. So I did a bit of research, and found out that 182 women had been killed and buried in shallow graves in the country in that 1 year. Yeah, it's a lot, isn't it? I mean, lots more men have been murdered in that time, and I won't go into that, but these women were all killed by men, and they were all buried, and it didn't necessarily make mainstream press. And what I wanted to do was start going to the locations where well, at the same time, there was the...
If I just slow that down a second. So Jude decided to go to the dump site, if you want to call it, or that was the press would call it, or the shallow grave of the murdered women, and retrace and find all the women in the country that had been left dead somewhere, and give them a happy ending, so to speak. Okay, or beautiful ending,
or equalise the ground a bit more, and kind of treat them all in the same way, not give them names, not give them those identities, but identify them by the things that would regrow in their place, that would come back to life in their absence.
So Jude would go on her own to the location, find the location, which is not easy to find, and then go to the location. Another slide, please. And another.
Okay, stop. So I'd go to these locations, and I've been photographing them on 5.4, so I do like to play with materials as well. And then I would dig up some of the soil, and also because I've been reading or learning about forensic botany, and how, and this is really fascinating, I think this is so fascinating, and I think this is one of the things that really feeds into why I don't think I ever work, is because everything becomes exciting to me, and I don't stop at the end of the day. I don't finish at 5 and go, oh, right, I'm done now. I'll be up till like 2 in the morning, go, oh, I can find out a bit more about this, and it's quite disturbing sometimes. It got quite bad, I was having quite bad dreams, but so I started digging up the soil, and forensic botany, basically, if something happens and you're buried somewhere, this doesn't happen in graveyards because there's all the formaldehyde and everything else, but your last meal can end up growing in the ground.
So things grow where a body's been left that wouldn't necessarily grow in that location.
And so sometimes historical things, forensic botanists can go and look at a site and they'll be able to say, that doesn't grow here. And that's how very old sites might be found. It's not always the case. So I thought, sorry, next.
These are things that are growing
on the
in
sites.
the locations, and then Jude will take them home and freeze them. And so you'll open the freezer one day and there'll be these frozen
no food in my freezer, just flowers that I've collected or fauna that I've collected from the site. And I started to realise they're beautiful, they're encased, they're kind of, and all different. Sometimes they're not different. And then the location, and then with the soil that I was also collecting, I didn't know what to do with that. And then I learned a bit about soil chromatography. So it's all about, every time I find something or want to do something, then try and find out more about how I can do it. How can I do that? How can I make this do something? So we'll stop there. The soil chromatography just is a new process, and I'm still not sure it's the right thing. I'm just playing with it at the moment. And that just, what happens is you bring the soil into silver, and it kind of exposes, and you can see what's in the soil, so all the different layers of nutrients. And it becomes quite scientific as well, and it's like, almost makes me clever. So, you know, but I just wanted to try and make a series of images that equalised or stopped that kind of difference. Why should anybody be treated differently because of how they look, or their sexual orientation, or their you know, anything. Nothing should be different, and they've all still been murdered, and they've all still been harmed, but they all should be treated as something beautiful that was. Yeah.
She's taking a photography and then, you know, running this through the forensic botanist and science, and then so there's all layers to the work. It's like the both of our work. It's not just, oh, here's a picture. Never.
And I suppose all my projects are like this. This is a slightly different project. This was before. This is you can just run through this one a bit quicker, Tommy. But this is all process-led. But this is all about my own trauma and stuff, which I don't, you know, it's not navel-gazing, but just dealing with my...
Well, similar to what Johannes said about how he's dealing with his own emotions through his work. This is how we deal with our emotions through our work.
So then, I guess, Nick and I, we knew our work was very different in terms of I'm much more materiality, but it's also very similar in that it is dealing with some quite complex, dark stuff.
Historical traumas.
Yeah. I think we're nearly back at you, Nick. I think we should go back to you, really. Just one more, I think, and then skip through. Stop there just a minute. So, just very back, like 100 years ago. What was it, 20 years ago that I did this one? 20 years ago I photographed, because I am interested in that idea of institutionalisation, not just buildings and all of those other things, but kind of how we're expected to behave. You know, society tells you you're supposed to do this, and this, and I guess I never really could quite manage to stick to the rules. So, so I always thought it was me. But anyway, I got into this prison and I got commissioned to photograph it all the way through, and I think...
This is Oxford Prison.
I felt very comfortable there.
This is Oxford Prison, and it was bought by a developer, but it was a listed building. And so Jude was there for 6 years on her own. With a key. During this redevelopment into a hotel, and 2 weeks ago, because we had a book launch and an exhibition in Oxford for some unrelated work, and we sat here in what is now the Malmaison. I couldn't afford to stay there, but we started drinking in the bar, and it's exactly as it is. But now each door to each cell is a hotel room. So there's quite fascinating
3 cells
project.
to a room, which I always think is like really shocking. You know, there's those kind of transparencies, but you know, this idea of institutionalisation runs.
Well, this is where we cross over with our work. Next, please. You have to cut us short, man, if we just keep going.
Yeah,
we won't stop. Just look through some images there, and I'll stop talking for a second.
Oh, that's, yeah.
You're going backwards, are you?
No.
Okay. So this is chapter 2 or book 2, which I made 2 projects on my MA, and this was the second chapter. And yesterday, we came from Photo London yesterday, where I was talking to a new publisher, and this will be published soon, so everything is moving in the right direction. So we want to skip through and keep going. And there are crossovers. I don't think I need to talk, I just keep talking here.
Don't go back to my stuff again.
Don't really know what to say then.
Mm.
So we work together, okay? And this year, we took on a studio and bought a large format printer, bought it on hire purchase or whatever to call it, so we pay monthly so we can afford it. And now we make our own books, make our own dummy books, of which there are multiple edits. And so when we then go to publishers, we're pretty much there ready to go, so we've done all of the work ourselves. And then we go to little book fairs, and we go to talks, and we do this. We promote, like Johannes said, where he travels all over and promotes his work. We promote our work. There's a lot of backstage work. And as I said, if it wasn't for Jude, I would just be just a mess on the stage here. So everything. I prefer to go and spend time with people and make this work, and then Jude steps in and does everything that I wouldn't necessarily do.
I think, well, we both, on the side of all of this, we both lecture at universities.
Yeah.
I'm
So
a
to
bit more
pay for this work, that's how I met Dawn, and Dawn is part of this process with these students. So I was fortunate to be employed at the University of Gloucester, where I lecture on the MA and the BA, and all of this has happened since I graduated 3 years ago, so it's all very recent.
I think I'm most unfortunate to have you. Isn't it?
So these are the sort of things that Jude makes for herself, for her own little works in progress.
Yeah, I do a lot of playing around, and I think this is the thing. I'll come back from teaching or working all day with students, and I'll go to the studio and you know, happily work there till...
Work doesn't end when you finish your studies, or work doesn't end when you do your day job. Then your actual work begins, and you know, it doesn't feel like work because you're doing something you absolutely love. And I think this is the last slide, isn't it?
Yes. And it can be, it can be really frustrating for other people if you are... if you are total, I mean, in any other language, I think I'm a workaholic, and you are also, and we just go on and on and on, and it's probably quite boring to everybody else in the world.
But when you love doing something so much,
we want to do,
when you love something so much, it doesn't feel that hard to
feel
do.
like work.
And so just this last slide, the Art Photography Festival, which we'll be going to next month. This is where our work collaborates even further, because we exhibited there, and it's a mix of both of our work. But you wouldn't, even though we have separate practices and separate projects, there are links because of the way we understand our work, or the way we layer our work, or the way we think deeply about our work. There are invariably there will be crossovers to our work, and so visually it matches and is telling. It's another version of the same story. Any more? Should we stop now? I think we'll stop. But it's all very much work in progress, it's all brand new, and it's all very exciting. Thank you.
Just...
Woo! Yeah. Does anybody have any questions for Nik and Jude about the process? Oh, yeah.
Any questions?
Any questions?
No questions.
No? Cool.
I'm good.
Cool. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I'll
Just shout, yeah.
did you have any sort of like ethical oversight with regards to Tony, because he's clearly a mentally ill man?
He's not mentally ill?
He wasn't?
No.
Oh,
And that's an assumption that you shouldn't make, really, until you know people.
was he, I'm sorry, I said something mentioned cracking up.
No, I said he was in a crack house, in that environment, so he's not mentally ill, no. And I'll spend an awful long time with people, and I won't make any pictures. I'll make friends first. With Tony, he phoned me. I've been friends with his for 2 years. Sometimes I can go 3 or 4 months without even making one picture, even though the camera's always present, and we meet with him fully aware that I have a camera, okay? and with Tony, he phoned me one day. I had another job at Exeter School of Art, and I was driving back on a Friday, and he phoned me, and he said I've had £14,000 put into my bank account, and it will kill me. Okay? He said I'll either kill myself with it, or the friends I keep will steal it, and indirectly I'll be dead anyway. He said, can you help me? What can I do with my money? And so Jude and I did a lot of research for him, and the most practical solution we could come up with was to invest it into premium bonds, which means all we had was a code. Again, if his friends were to mark him or whatever, exploit his vulnerability or his generosity, they couldn't get his money for a week, because he had to call us or send us a message. We had to push a key on a computer, and it would take a week for the money to go into his account. He could have all the money he wanted. We didn't have any control of the money. All we had was the password, the code, so that his friends couldn't exploit him. So ethically, I'm absolutely fine with what I do, because, as I said, they're my friends. I love them dearly, and I'll do everything I can to be their friend, to be their support, and it works both ways. When I need them, they're there for me also.
It is a good question.
No, it's a great question.
It's a good question.
And
Because
it's a
and
question
it is
I
a really
always
relevant thing.
expect, because it's contentious work. But as I said, I'm fully immersive, and so I'm trying to speak for people that don't often get listened to. So I don't
Or they get represented in a certain
misrepresented, or there's a lack of understanding. And so I always use a quote. This quote by a photographer called Dwayne Michaels. I'm not interested in what something looks like, I'm interested in what something feels like. And so I'll spend enough time with people until I feel it's right to show or share or narrate something on their behalf, because it's always going to be on their behalf, or my interpretation, and everything is, it's a collaboration, always. And if they're not happy, they won't happen.
I'm really happy that you were helping Tony.
Yeah.
It's just good to have a wide picture.
Yeah, of course. No, it's a good question, thank you very much. I'm
No,
glad you asked it.
It is one of those, and I think that it's a challenge that a lot of people are facing, and because I work in universities as well, and we're coming up.
Well, there's
We're
now an
constantly
ethical police.
thinking about
There's
this.
an ethical police at universities that control everything to the point where I don't know if my work would even pass the criteria.
But in some ways that's problematic, because then if so many things stop being visualised, then you start to censorship, isn't it? And it stops those voices, because Tony...
And the people who are underrepresented become less represented, because you're not even allowed to speak on their behalf to begin with. And another version of that question that people always ask is, is this poverty porn? And that really frustrates me, because these people have more money than I do. Okay, there's something called PIP, and PIP is a payment to people that if they misuse drugs, or if they're unable to work because of something like drug misuse, then the system writes them off, so they no longer become a statistic of unemployment. And some of my friends are on £1,200, £1,500 a month, plus their housing is paid, to not work, and they can't work anyway. But so
it keeps them trapped in that system.
Is this looking into poverty? It's got nothing to do with poverty at all. Okay? They're better off than I am financially most of the time. Okay? Just because I have nice shoes or whatever doesn't mean that there's no economic difference here. Okay? You might look at it as a privilege because I'm able to stand here, and they may not be. But I do my best to be on their side and stand here and represent my friends.
And I think you do great.
Thank you.
Yeah. Massive round of applause again for Nik Roche and Jude Wall. Please.